Here's an alliance for you. Chuck Schumer and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have teamed up to provide some aid to the many, many American families who have largely needlessly lost loved ones during this pandemic. They made a rare joint appearance. Presumably in the future, they'll make appearances on the debate stage together. But for now, it's a rare joint appearance to announce $260 million in funeral benefits, specifically dedicated for New Yorkers as part of the latest COVID relief package. The money is part of a $2 billion national pot of disaster funds, which will be channeled through FEMA. They announced that families can get reimbursed up to $7,000 for funeral expenses. Eligibility for the funds will be retroactive through the beginning of the pandemic, way back to January of last year through to December of last year as well. Although, bear in mind the pandemic is still going on, so hopefully that will be increased at some point. But Jordan, I know that on the surface level, man, it does seem messed up that, as we were talking about before the show, it's so hard to get money to people to help them survive the pandemic, but we can find money for them after they die. But hundreds of thousands of families have had to pay for funerals, and funerals are not cheap, and it's in the midst of an economic collapse. So this isn't something that I had thought about before I first saw AOC tweeting about it, but it is a good thing to do for the many families that have been needlessly stuck with tragedy over the last year.
Yeah, it is a very grim story. When I saw you include this, I just was kind of shook. Think about the beginning of the pandemic, and we started to see freezer trucks full of people who had passed away. And despite that, you had conservatives rushing to hospitals saying oh, it's not full, it's not real. And just people continued to die, and they're pushed out, and they wanted to reopen businesses, and ignored it and insisted that it wasn't a big deal. And every step of the way fought any attempts to help people. Now, when someone says, okay, maybe they can just die with a little bit of dignity. Maybe their family shouldn't now be burdened with expensive bills, or choose between throwing them in a ditch or cremating them or whatever, or maybe just some form of closure. And mind you, a lot of these people probably couldn't even see their loved ones before they died because they were practicing social distancing and just generally not safe. This has been a tragic year for so many people. And I gotta imagine the response to this from Republicans is going to be, this is government waste, we shouldn't have to do this. People should do it themselves. They should have thought about it. And the same types of personal fiscal responsibility talking points that they see trotted out for every other issue. And so it just, from start to finish, every step of the way, these people have stood there and said, okay, it's not a big deal, it doesn't matter, not my problem, I don't care. Now we've got their colleagues dying, and they just still don't care. What's it going to take? And I would imagine that there isn't a point where they'll ever care. These are unbelievably self-absorbed people.
I think objectively you're right that there's no point. I mean, I would argue that regardless of which group you're talking about, Republican lawmakers, right-wing media, the people who became the anti-maskers, I think they cared far more the first 3 weeks of this than they have ever since then. And I think that they care less with every passing week, no matter how many people die. Yeah, imagine you took us back to the very beginning. Let's imagine going back to the very beginning when we were covering, when it was just overseas, when it was originally overseas, we're talking about oh my God, it's so rough, it's killing a bunch of people, and then it starts to come here. Imagine if we'd said, man, in the end, they're gonna allocate $2 billion to help bury people who've been killed by this. And then someone might say, wait, it's gonna cost $2 billion to bury all that will have died. And then we'll have to say, well, no, technically that'll get us through December. And then we'll come back to the topic and figure out how many more billions of dollars we need by the very end. I mean, that is just madness. But it would be worse to not have the money. These funerals are expensive. For many people, those 7,000 is probably not going to cover it actually. And to your point about the lack of dignity and how inhumane all of this has been, I try to be very opaque about this, but my relative who lost someone very close to them, from the admittance to the hospital, never got to see that person. Over a month in the hospital until that person died, never got to see them. And then is struck by not only losing this person, but a lot of money as well.
Can we just give them that? Can we just give people that? Just a help for a funeral. Just give them that, that's it. Like it's not a tall ask after everything else. If they blocked everything along the way, just let people have some form of closure. That's it. That's not a tall ask.
No, it's not. Now, in rolling out this plan and announcing it with Chuck Schumer, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez spoke about the expenses related to losing a loved one. Let's take a look at what the Congresswoman had to say.
When you suddenly lose a loved one, you're talking about an expense of $4, $5, $7, $10,000. And then during COVID, with overrun funeral facilities, etc., families also are having to deal with having to pay for the storage of the bodies of their own loved ones. This is wrong.
Oh my God! I mean, like you were saying about the freezer trucks, and I remember we covered when Texas was starting to spike. There were job postings for people to like move bodies. Like the description was like you have to be able to carry a couple 100-pound bodies like for hours a day. Just like imagine having to pay in the storage for the body until finally you might be able to have a funeral because there's so many going on. What a failure. But I'm glad that AOC, who talked also about the costs that were put on her family after her father died back in 2008, understands that and prioritizes this because this is not something that lots of politicians were talking about.
No, I can't even believe we're having this conversation, but it's really depressing and grim. But it's the least we could do. It's to add the storage fee on top of it is really cruel because these are people who have been struggling, in many cases struggling to make ends meet all year. So now you're adding another fine while you're also simultaneously not helping them and not and blocking stimulus checks. So it's just you get them coming and going.
And by the way, sort of related to this, she was asked if the funds would apply to undocumented families, and Ocasio-Cortez said yes and explained why those communities should not be afraid to apply for these funds, saying, quote, "I think it's completely understandable why there is that fear there, especially over the last 4 years of targeting of our immigrant families. But I think right now our families, especially under a Biden administration, a Democratic Senate and a Democratic House that is prioritizing immigrant rights, including those who are undocumented, to not have fear and to not allow that fear to further marginalize our community." And I like that sentiment. And so far, most of what Biden has done in the area of immigration, I think has been positive, although there are some clear gaps, including things that he had promised. I think, Jordan, you've actually tweeted about some of the very clear immigration related promises he's made that are as within his purview in executive orders as the other things he's done that he hasn't done yet. But in this area, especially considering the past track record of Democratic administrations, we can't just hope that they're gonna be awesome from the point of view of the undocumented. So, hopefully people will be watching in this area. But I am glad that they're gonna have access to the money as well, especially because the disease has hit undocumented communities harder than others.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/thedamagereport. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.